a show favorite, Jack Posobiec, to help me go through some of the biggest stories going on in the United States of America and the world. Jack, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Steven, always a pleasure, man.
So let me start you off with this question. This is something that I want you to help me understand. Joe Biden said in a news conference this week that he doesn't understand why Americans are so down on the newcomers, the illegal immigrants. They've been model citizens, he said. Is Joe Biden insane? Why would he say this? Is this a weak old man with a poor memory forgetting how many people are being trafficked, how many girls are being violated, increases in kidnap, increase in murder, theft, robbery, assault, disrespect for police? What is the president of the United States talking about?
So, Stephen, I had this really interesting take on Joe Biden because I've always tried to figure out who the real Joe Biden is. And you're talking to someone who I was one of the first people to get a copy of the Hunter Biden laptop, which of course was access to his entire iCloud, basically. So we've got all these text messages directly between Joe Biden and his son Hunter. You've also got these messages and the emails, and a lot of them like talking to his son directly and saying, "Oh, I got to get you into help. I need this, I need that." And so there's this view, is he a corrupt person? He is a corrupt person, but it's strange that in his mind, I really think, and this is going to sound, I don't know, maybe a little off, off script, but I'll say, I think in Joe Biden's mind, you have to realize that he thinks he's the good guy. He thinks he's the person who's actually doing good in the world. And he said, well, so we made a little bit of money. That's what everybody does. It's not a big deal. We took care of my family. That's what you're supposed to do. I took care of Hunter. I took care of my brother. I took care of the wife and everything else. And it's all good to go. But in his mind, when you catch him in these moments like this, he actually thinks he's the good guy. And so he also grew up at a time where, keep in mind, he's born during World War II. He's actually older than a baby boomer. He's actually silent generation. And in his America at that time, directly after World War II, this was America's boom. And so to him, none of these bad things are actually happening because he doesn't actually pay attention. He's in such a bubble from what's going on in the real world that he doesn't realize the crime that's gone up. He doesn't realize the prices that have gone up. He doesn't realize the expensive cost of family formation that have happened during all this time, because he still remembers America of the 1950s. And he thinks that it's fundamentally still like that around the country today, and that he's just, trying to help out some other groups who want to take part in those things. And I know it's kind of strange. So it's this view of Joe Biden where it's like, as he's getting older now, and this is where it's even worse, as he's getting older and his mind is just less and less there, he's actually regressing. So anything that he may have learned, I mean, keep in mind, this is the guy who ran the crime bill in the 1990s. So he knew crime was out of control 30 years ago, that he actually can't remember any of those things. And he thinks that it's still the 1950s. So it's yes, he actually has lost his mind, and he doesn't realize the consequences of his own actions. And if you take this view, if you actually take this view, I'm not talking about the administration, because obviously there's a lot of bad actors in the administration, but if you take this view of just sort of the old man who's not all there, and then you apply that to his decisions on Ukraine, his decisions on spending, his decisions on the way he talks about Trump, the way he talks about illegals in the border, Israel, Gaza, it kind of makes sense, because he doesn't actually realize what's going on a daily basis around him. And I know, everybody likes to make jokes about that. No, he can't find his way off of a stage or something after he's done giving a speech. But think about it. Imagine a man who actually is living in like a sci-fi alternate parallel dystopian universe where he just thinks the rest of the world is this wonderful place, and that's all that's going on. And he's just trying to help people when he doesn't realize what he's actually doing.
That's interesting. Yeah, he's so out of touch.
And in insane countries, you would, put a guy like that in a home or something.
Yeah, I remember when he was really pushing the forced vaccine mandates on people and the wear your mask, and then he was out at a nice dinner in Washington, D.C., like $150 a plate with no mask, and everybody was like, what is going on with this guy? Like, he just continues to show that he's not all there, or he's just completely out of touch with reality.
Yeah, do you ever have like a family member, and I'm sure we all have, who was in, a senior living community, I think they're supposed to call them now. And not when you go meet them, but you go meet, and there's always like somebody in there who comes up and recognizes you and thinks that you're a member of their family, even though you've never met this person whatsoever. And they're like telling you stories, and then they start telling you about their medical disorders. And you're like, look, I'm sure you're a really nice person, but I'm not your long lost husband or your son or your grandson or whatever. But you try to like get them to some authority and like kind of get away from them. That's Joe Biden. That's who we have currently running the country.
Yikes, that is scary. One of Biden's top economic advisors said the United States can't go bankrupt because we print our own money. He then couldn't explain why we print money. He couldn't explain why we borrow money. He didn't know why we paid interest on money, and he couldn't explain bonds and treasury bills. I looked this guy up, and Biden's top economic advisor, Bernstein, has a degree in music. Is this why life is so expensive? Is this why inflation is so high? Is this why we're adding $1 trillion of debt to the national debt every 100 days? Has Biden installed morons at the highest levels of the US government?
So, I mean, the short answer on this is yes. And, I was just talking about how I think Joe Biden is just kind of not all there mentally. He's got early onset dementia, clearly. And that's what's driving a lot of the behavior that we're seeing right now with guys like this. No, they're just dumb. Particularly when it comes to when you talk to any liberal about economics and just the basics of economics, how things work, how economics drives decisions, how people are driven through human nature by their own incentives, by their own needs. They have no clue how any of these things actually works. They simply think if you just throw money around in the economy, then you'll get more money. This is something, by the way, it's called the Kahn Effect, and you can go back to like French philosophers during like medieval times, and they understood. They had this great economist who would say, whenever a new gold mine is found in France, you'd think it would benefit the people who maybe lived around the gold mine or the people who owned it, but not necessarily. They always said that it would benefit the people who were closest to the throne first, and that those people would benefit at the expense of those furthest away. Why? Because as the new gold was spent into the kingdom, this caused more money to be added, and this caused prices to go up everywhere. Now, imagine if you've got people like that running our actual economy, who don't understand that quantitative easing is a terrible thing, who don't understand that the reason you're supposed to be borrowing money, or you shouldn't be borrowing as much as possible, because that is getting into debt, but you're not supposed, it's about living beyond your means. Well, unfortunately, the US government has been living beyond its means since about, 2008. And we got bailed out basically by the Chinese back then, because they were the ones who came in and were buying up all this debt that we were creating. So we've just been living off of that, and with funny money in our system like crazy. What Biden did and his people, they said, well, instead of directing this money towards entrepreneurial sources or people who can create jobs, they thought they could just use the government directly to create these make work jobs. And of course, we saw this through the Great Depression and the New Deal and a lot of these same types of policies that ended up increasing and lengthening the Depression all the way back then. These are things that have been debunked for years, and yet you've got the Democrats continuing to go in on it. And I love the fact that when you hear these guys, they couldn't give you any basic information as to what quantitative easing is, what economic stimulus is, financing government. Why do you pay interest? What is interest? How does any of this work? No, unfortunately, you have, like, as you say, music studies people, and they're all poets. They're all like poets and, philosophy majors and literature types that are actually trying to understand the basic math of the economy, and they simply can't.
Yeah, what worries me is imagine that you were having open heart surgery. You have it, you come out, and you're having like all of these horrible medical issues, side effects. You're like, what is going on? And then you go to the hospital's website, and you find out that your surgeon, instead of graduating from medical school, graduated from gender studies at Columbia, or Arabic Turkey history of the 15th century, something incredibly useless. Like the guy running fiscal policy for the United States has a music degree and can't explain money or debt. I mean, that to me, that's just like terrifying. Then you dig a little deeper, you find out that Biden's top health military person is a transgender male who believes he's a woman. You dig a little bit deeper, you find out that his top nuclear scientist was a transgender guy who, for kicks and giggles, steals women's luggage at the airport. And you dig in a little bit more, like as you dig in over and over again, like look at Karine Jeanpierre. Like there's a story out right now. She is a DEI hire. They hired a black lesbian on purpose so that it would give the ultimate cover for a white male running the country, right? Now it's backfiring. They want to fire her, but they can't because she's doing such a terrible job. Like every person you dig in, you find that they are complete and total morons, and they were all hired almost to push forward like a Marxist agenda versus running an actual first world country.
Yeah, you know what's funny about this chief economic advisor is that of that list that you just mentioned, I think he's the only one, and I remember looking at it too, that I said, you know, you would assume normally that this would be one of those DEI hires, but it doesn't really seem to be in this case. He's just dumb. He's just basically dumb and completely unqualified. Like, hey man, I don't know, go write a song about it, but maybe stop trying to run the economy.
Yeah. So you've probably been to some of these protests, or at least you monitor them like I do. These pro-Hamas leaders, many of them not even university students, they are now publicly calling for people to come from all over the country to New York City to have a day of rage. Like a day of rage does not sound like a peaceful protest. What do you think is going to happen on this day of rage? And is the NYPD Blue and the National Guard going to be called out? Like, what are your thoughts on this call for a day of rage? To me, it sounds like jihad on American soil.
Well, so they've done this a number of times. Remember, we had the transgender day of rage, then we had the May 1st day of rage, the Met Gala protests, which got very violent, very quickly referred to as a day of rage. But what I'm really hoping, I actually have a different opinion of this. I fully support the day of rage. I think that the Democrats and their far left buddies in all of this should go all in on the day of rage. However, I might suggest that they shift just a little bit, just shift the date of it and the location. Maybe you should guys hold this later and say, I don't know, mid-August, and in the city of Chicago, where you're going to be holding the Democrat National Convention. And I think, boy, just like you guys did in the same city of Chicago, 1968, maybe a little nostalgia factor for everybody out there. Why not hold another day of rage outside the Democrat National Convention? My goodness, I would fully support it.
Well, I think that you're going to get your wish, because these pro-Hamas protests are only gaining steam. And if Joe Biden is in fact going to be the Democrat nominee, if he's going to hold on to those delegates, those votes, I think that we're going to see massive pro-Hamas protests outside of the DNC convention this summer. We'll see what ends up coming of that. In the past week, we've learned.
Could I speak to something you just said there? Because I think you said that's something very, very insightful that is important for people to understand, is that if Joe Biden is to be the nominee, and this really is a jump ball with the Democrat process right now. With the Republican side, everybody knows Trump's going to be the nominee. That's why he's on trial. That's why they're putting him through the communist show trial in New York City. Again, the federal government and the state government in this case, particularly, has removed the leading candidate for one of the opposition parties from the campaign trail by state force, and is purposely demanding that he stay on the show trial. It's incredible that we don't talk about this way every day, but there's so much going on. And the question, though, about whether or not Biden remains the nominee, here's what I think will happen. One of two things. Number one, he remains the nominee. That's if they think they have an actual chance of beating Donald Trump in November. If they think, they know that they're not winning right now, but if they think they have a chance, they'll remain with Joe Biden. But there's another possibility. Other possibility is that at the convention, Joe Biden wins the nomination. Then Joe Biden walks up to that stage, walks up to that podium, or, kind of shuffles up there as he does, goes there, goes to the microphone just like this and says, I respectfully decline this nomination. I can't accept it. And he'll make some claim about health of the family or wanting to spend more time with his family in his later years. At that point, it throws it open to an open convention. The media will be completely enwrapped by this and enchanted by this. You're enthralled. You're not going to hear anything about the riots outside, which will surely be going on. And then they pass it to Kamala Harris. If Kamala Harris is given the nomination at the Chicago convention, this can only mean one thing. This means that the Democrats have decided to throw in the towel at the presidential level, and they will be shifting their finances and their campaign coffers to the state and House races. They know there's no chance that Kamala Harris beats Donald Trump. So what they're going to do is say, you know what? We're throwing in the towel on the main race, but we'll try to at least hold on to the Senate. Probably not going to happen, or potentially flip the House, which, of course, as we can all see, is very, very close and very, very doable. Arguably, Hakeem Jeffries already is kind of running the House because the margins are so thin. And unfortunately, they're as thin as the backbone of the current House leadership on the Republican side. That was a good one. This is something that I could see, because remember, it's a finite amount of money and a finite amount of time. And I could definitely see this potential scenario rolling itself out at that Chicago convention.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've privately wondered if they just say, okay, listen, just let Donald Trump have these last 4 years, and then we go all in aggressive on the presidential race for 2028.
And that's clearly what Newsom is doing.
Yeah, Newsom is being smart. He's going, wait a minute, I'm not gonna jump in at the very end and have my first nationwide run be a loss, right? I'll throw another thought at you. What if instead of Kamala Harris, they say, wait a minute, a lot of the polling data, especially among young people, is leaning towards RFK Jr., who is obviously still a Democrat. He only left in order to try to win, but his heart, his soul, his mind is still a Democrat. His family hates his guts for leaving the Democrat Party. He beats Joe Biden in a lot of head-to-head polling. So what if they say, listen, you're not on all of the ballots, or you spent millions of dollars, you finally got on, but what if you come back to the family, back to the fold, and we make you the candidate, and they actually do throw money, time, and attention behind RFK now that Biden is out of the way? What are your thoughts on that?
Or I'll do you one better. Make Kamala Harris the candidate and put RFK as the vice presidential candidate for Kamala Harris, thus accomplishing what you just said, this idea of a fusion ticket where they're still in control. Is it possible politically? Sure. But I do think financially it wouldn't work out very well for them, because this guy's been too anti-pharma, at least, even though he's kind of shifting on that a little bit. In general, I think he's seen as so anti-pharma and definitely anti-Wall Street, even though, as you say, he's extremely far left on so many of the social issues, whether it comes to abortion, whether it comes to trans surgery. This guy is like the left of the left on this. He's like Chairman Mao on a lot of these economic issues, especially climate. And so I don't think they would do it, but only because, not from a political perspective, because if you look at it that way, yes, it would be very good for them politically. And, as a political, whatever strategist, I would say, man, that would be a tough ticket to beat. They'll never do it because they take too much money, way too much money from big pharma and way too much money from big capital and woke capital, that they'll never do it, because they're not going to sign those checks with a guy like RFK Jr. on the ticket. Yeah.
I like RFK Jr. I do. My biggest worry with him is that even if he was to miraculously win, who's going to be in his cabinet? It's going to be 100% of the same Democrats that Biden and Obama use, because those are the people that he parties with. Those are the people that he rubs shoulders with. Those are all the legal people that would back him up. So even if he wins, it's just another Democrat ticket. That's why I keep believing they might try to pull him back in some way, but we'll see. We'll see. Time.
Well, the real coup, I think the real coup would be if Donald Trump could come up and go to RFK and broker some kind of deal with him where, not vice president, but maybe something like, we'll put you in charge of health and human services, or we'll put you in charge of, make up a position where he's going to be the director of the COVID-19 and vaccine weaponization investigation, something like this. You do something like that, he drops out, he endorses Trump. I predict, that would be the end of the race right there. If that happened, it would be the end of the race.
I think one of the best things they could do is say, listen, we like you, and to honor your father, we're going to make you attorney general. And you get to go after Fauci. You get to go after the schools, big pharma, the military. We'll see. Who knows?
Well, that would be great. I just don't know. For the same reason that I don't think the big numbers, the big donors would back RFK on a ticket. I think it would be very hard to get him confirmed by the Senate. That's the only thing. You need those 60 votes. And look, I think Republicans will do well in the Senate this time around, but I just think with the some of the moneyed interests that we know exist there, particularly when it comes to Ukraine and pharma and war in general, I don't think that RFK would be able to be stomached by them.
Well, speaking of the Senate, I'm very much looking forward to having my representative, Mitt Romney, out of the way. So,
I can't wait.
Yeah. In the past week, we've learned with certainty that Special Prosecutor Jack Smith has been colluding with the White House legal counsel, the FBI, the DOJ, and NARA. We learned that Biden had pallets of boxes shipped to Mar-a-Lago and then sicked the FBI and DOJ on him to recover them. Now we're learning that Jack Smith and his team have admitted to tampering with the Trump evidence, and the top secret documents photo that was spread all over the media to make Trump look bad was in fact staged by the FBI with FBI cover sheets. Trump is calling for Jack Smith to be arrested, and Judge Cannon, as of this morning, has pushed back the May 9th trial date. Where do you see this case going? To me, it looks like it's all falling apart.
Well, here's what's really going on with these cases. And the question is, of course, does Donald Trump win? So I'll explain why. Because the federal cases, what President Trump's been able to do with the documents case and with the January 6th case, these are the two cases that are taking place at the federal level. There's also, of course, we know the Stormy Daniels case, which is winding its way through right now in New York City, and then the Fani Willis case down in Georgia, which, of course, we all can see how that was torpedoed by the great Mike Roman out of Northeast Philadelphia, great Philadelphia Catholic, by the way. And so this question about the federal cases, it's very clear that what President Trump's legal team strategy isn't necessarily to go in and win each one of these on the merits. It's also to go through and delay, point out the holes in the case. And there are gaping holes in every single one of these cases. Because remember, this activity took place years and years and years ago. All of the activity here either took place at the beginning of or in some cases during the presidency or the beginning of the post-presidency. So January 6th, then going into like the end of January in 2021. So this is years ago. Why did Jack Smith wait so long? Because they weren't sure whether or not they were going to go ahead with the indictments to begin with. So they were rushed and they were sloppy. And now we're seeing this sloppiness with the way the evidence was presented to the defense team. Turns out it was actually incorrect. Some of the documents were either mislabeled. Some of them were missing. Some of them, we're told, were actually not even put in the same order. The digital scans were all messed up when they put them in. And they said, look, this was clearly tampered by the Department of Justice. This was clearly tampered. Of course, as you say, those document cover sheets were completely just strewn about the room to create a photo op that they could then leak to the press. That's not how President Trump or anyone was storing these at Mar-a-Lago. So what's the real strategy? The real strategy here That's, by the way, on the documents case. On the other case, January 6th, the real questions are two questions are about, number one, presidential immunity that we've heard a lot about, but then also number two, this question of obstruction, whether or not the obstruction charge that was placed not only just on Trump, but also on many of the January 6th defendants is accurate. Because, of course, the obstruction statute, if you want to look at it, and this is like the super nerdy, like legal explanation, the statute that they charged Trump and the J6ers under has nothing to do with congressional proceedings. It has to do with legal and particularly criminal proceedings. And so if you look at the way that it's written, it just says, official disruption of a federal government proceeding, which is like the most loosely written statute. And by the way, loosely written statutes. So this is something, okay, if laws are written and are over vague or over broad, they can be declared and have been throughout history declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. So the fact that they're taking all of this stuff up to the court, what does it do? It delays and delays and delays these trials all the way until after the election date. And if and when, and I certainly believe that if everything goes according to plan, it's not like there's a wide path to the presidency, but there is a tightrope to the presidency right now. And if Donald Trump is able to walk that in a way that I think he's probably the only person who could, he wins and all of this goes away, because there's no way that you can prosecute the president. Of course, he could just pardon himself. So, of course, these cases will be dropped. That's the real strategy here from the legal teams, is to go after, is just chip away at these and then wait until after the election. He wins, boom, the cases go away.
And the more time that goes by, the more these cases look weaker and weaker. Right. It's not like, gosh, the closer we get, the more damning evidence. It's like, no, it's actually unraveling.
Yes, such a good point.
Time has not been on their side. And
this is, by the way, this is every single Trump scandal, right? Every single Trump scandal works like this. You either get, the first headline, the first drop, it's, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. He gave nuclear secrets to the Russians. He was selling us out to the North Koreans and the Iranians and all this. And that's like day one. And suddenly, the donor class is clutching their pearls saying, oh my God, we got to find another candidate who, I don't know, Ron DeSantis or Romney, somebody's got to run. We can't give money to this guy. And then, as you work, as you just said, as you go beyond that initial date, as we work our way forward, we find more and more and more and more that the evidence just doesn't hold up to what the original allegations were. And of course, the grandfather of all of these was the Russia collusion case, which was always just supposed to be meant to be a smear campaign by Hillary Clinton against Donald Trump. It was never meant to hold up to actual scrutiny. And that's why it didn't, of course. It was supposed to be like the Democrats' October surprise, and we were never supposed to know about all the lies that were going on. Now, if you want to talk about the illegality and the fact that you've got so many government operatives, not just Jack Smith, but also John Brennan and James Clapper, and of course, James Comey, all of these people, in the case of Brennan, by the way, an avowed communist who were operating on behalf of their own national security agencies to interfere in election. There's no question. There's no question these people should be behind bars. There's no question these people, and including Anthony Fauci, by the way, should be facing legal remuneration and legal consequences for what they have done in the name of the public good. I mean, there's no question to me. So when I hear President Trump talking about that, I say, what else would you do? What would be the appropriate response? And none of this is going to stop until there is accurate reciprocity from people on the others, and not just on the right, by the way, people in the middle, people are independents, whatever. Your government is going to stay out of control until someone actually goes up and does something to not just, like make them go and give some speech or have a bad hearing in front of Congress. No, I mean, until they actually personally feel that they can't do these things anymore.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, the photos of the top secret documents spilled all over the floor is like the perfect example, right? That picture is released to the media and boom, almost everyone I know is like, ooh, gosh, this does not look good, right? Now, enough time goes by, we realize, wait a minute, those were planted. Mm-hmm. That photo was staged, and the top secret stuff that we think that we're privileged to see, those are literally just cover sheets that the FBI printed to make things look worse than they really are. The whole thing is a setup. The whole thing was an illusion, but what they're counting on is that more people saw the documents strewn across the floor than the follow-up story of this is a planted fake story.
It's a classic communist style smear tactic. Actually, no, it's funny for me because I served for 8 years as an intelligence officer, and we see cover sheets like that in the office literally every single day, because you might be going from a skiff area into another area, or one component. One area has a certain component read on, another area has a different component read on, and it's all compartmentalized. And so if you've got to move information between one or the other, you've got to print it out. You've got to put on these cover sheets. But the cover sheets just sit there as it's like a folder, right? It's like a folder that just kind of sits on your desk. And to me, it always looked like someone had just knocked over one of those folders. They're all empty, but it would be completely empty, because why else would you store them together like that? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's like those Twitter videos of a cat that's like looking around and then pushes something off the counter. Like that's
exactly
what that box looked like.
From the moment I first saw it, that's exactly it's funny you mentioned cat, but yeah, it looks like someone turned around in their chair too hard and knocked over the folders. And for some reason, somebody took a picture of that, because even if you were, by the way, actually trying to investigate and figure out what was in the documents, why would you throw them around the floor like that?
Yeah. Well, and then Biden having those documents shipped, like such a Trojan horse move, right? Like, okay, send in the evidence that we need to get him, and then sick the FBI on them to get those back, and then boom, make him look bad.
I've been told so many times, by the way, that what they're really after wasn't necessarily the evidence that was sent in, but that, I mentioned the Russiagate and the Russia collusion hoax before, and there is this. It's a very spicy, very juicy rumor that President Trump, and he's talked about this as well as his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, that he retained himself a copy of the original documents on Crossfire Hurricane. So the investigation into himself, he didn't trust the National Archives or the federal government or any of those people with having a copy of these and having the only copy of these. So he kept a copy for himself, ordered it to be declassified. And so there's been this rumor that it's actually that the Department of Justice was trying to go after, because what is it? It shows that this investigation was opened up for political purposes, that we've never been able to find any verifiable evidence that there were links between the original Trump campaign and the Russian state or anything like this. And so the question, of course, I think about it in like every, courtroom movie you've watched. They say, what was the probable cause? What was the probable cause that started the investigation that led the cops to go into the room, and they go to the judge and he gets the warrant? What was the probable cause? And if there's a problem with the probable cause, the rest of the case goes away. It's called fruit of the poison tree. And so he has got the original documents, Trump does, that show the probable cause was, we want to beat Donald Trump in the 2016 election, and that he never let it go. And yet, of course, those documents were not found at Mar-a-Lago. Now, I'm not saying I know this from any of my sources or anyone in Trump world, but I would just say that if I'm Donald Trump and I've got some documents that I know the federal government would love to get back, the last place I would ever hide them would be Mar-a-Lago or Trump Tower. I'd put them in like one of the Trump properties that's like somewhere else, completely, totally off the beaten path, somewhere where no one would even think to look for them.
Well, the FBI was like, it's in Melania's underwear drawer. That's where he would hide them. That's where they are.
I mean, it just shows you. It shows you how depraved. I'm just going to say it's like between that and the Stormy Daniels. It shows you how depraved these people are, and they want you to think that they're these master chess players and that there's some that they're keeping us all safe. But really, what are they doing? They're rooting around in the First Lady's underwear drawer with her private items, her private things, her most personal items, because this is who they are. This is the way they think. They are totally stuck in this guttural, low, dysgenic, ugly sense of mind, their concept of mind. And so they impose that on everyone else. They assume that if you're Donald Trump or you're Melania, that's where you would hide something that's safe or important to you, because it tells more about they themselves than it does about Trump or the First Lady or Melania Trump at all. It's actually telling on themselves, because ultimately, and we talk about this in the book that we're doing, that what they're operating from isn't a sense of justice or a sense of empathy or a sense of safety. It's envy, it's jealousy, it descends into blind rage. This is why they're constantly making these comments. They say, oh, Trump and phallic symbols. It's like it's this ridiculous, like totally debunked pop psychology that they're always putting in. They really believe that stuff, though, because at their core, they hate that there are people in the country that are successful, that are accomplished, that have done well without having to suck up to the system like they have their entire lives.
Yeah. Speaking of your book, tell us. I know it's coming out this summer. Unhumans. Tell my audience about that book.
Yeah, so just in a nutshell, we all kind of understand that we're living through a period where politics isn't operating the way that we think it should be operating, and it doesn't not working the way. Again, I said before, the leading presidential candidate for the opposition is currently on show trial in New York City, and he's been arrested 4 times. That's not a normal thing that happens anywhere in the world, unless you're like in the third world. Or I was just over in I was over in Eastern Europe and some like former Iron Curtain countries, and they were like, "Oh yes, we've seen this movie many times. Yes, we know. This is normal. It used to be normal around here," and it's okay. I can make that joke in Polish, and we understand that what we are actually living through, and this is our thesis, that what we're living through is a communist revolution under other terms and other means. And people will say, well, wait a minute. We've seen communism in the past, and this isn't like that. And so what we do in the book is we go through every communist revolution. We actually start with France, and we call that a proto-communist revolution. Then we go through Russia, we go through China, we go through the Spanish Civil War, which was a communist revolution that people don't know. And we walk through all the stages of a communist revolution and go through and say, look, Mark Twain was right. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And this is where I come in with my intelligence background. I say, look, warfare has changed since the time of 1917 Russia or 1798 France. It's not like that anymore. And in the same way that warfare has changed, so have communist revolutions. And so what I explain to people is that what we're living through is an irregular communist revolution. This is 5th generation warfare. It is gray zone warfare. And this is why you can walk down the street and, it's springtime in the country right now, and people will say, hey, it's really nice out. Schools are open, maybe crime's up, prices are up. It doesn't feel like I'm living through a communist revolution. I say, okay, sure. But now walk down the street wearing a MAGA hat. Now go onto one of the campuses and, hold up a flag of Israel, see what happens. This shows how what's going on now is a communist revolution that takes place mainly on these little pieces of glass that we carry around in our pockets and are beamed directly into our minds every single day. And so the book is called Unhumans. You can get a copy, unhumansbook.com. We're actually doing a book launch at the Turning Point event in Detroit this June. The book itself comes out on July 4th. And we just put out a system. We put out a system explaining how to defeat these people, how to completely disrupt their operations every time we find them. And we talk about it from that perspective that I just explained. They are not operating from a basis of equal justice or security or safety or sharing things with people. No, they want the death. They want the destruction. They want the dismemberment of societies. They actually crave it. That's why when you say, oh, communism has caused 100 million deaths, why do people still support it? And we respond, well, that's because they view that as a good start. They think 100 million needs to be increased maybe to 1 billion, because those people were all anti-communist. Those people were all, corrupt. And I talked to my My wife was born in the Soviet Union, and I talked to her a little bit about this book, and she said, well, we were taught that, all those small business owners were exploiting their workers, and that's why everything had to be confiscated for them. That's why all the farmers had to lose all their lands. That's why all the people who were working at companies had to have their, had to be arrested, and if they went, and I said, and what happened if they didn't go along with it? He said, well, then other things happened to them. Yeah, other things happened to them. And so it's a complete understanding of the mindset that Western society is up against. And it's an explanation of how it's now more cultural than economic, and an actual system. And this is key, an actual counter-revolutionary system to defeat them at every single level, all the way up to, the Elon Musk and Donald Trump level, all the way down to like neighborhoods and churches. It's a really, really exciting book. And I'm glad to have some time to talk to you about it.
Great. Well, I'll put a link down below so that people can find that directly. Jack Posobiec, thank you so much for coming on and going through this. It's been a great conversation. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
God bless, man.